In 1949, Andy Warhol moves to New York City, and by 1959, he was the highest paid commercial artist there. But his career then takes a different path because in 1960, he starts what he calls the factory. Now, note, he doesn't call it an artist studio, but factory here indicates this kind of mass manufacturing of visual products. In fact, he kind of mock marketed himself as a consumer product. And looking at a number of different Warhol works here, I think we're going to understand what he means by that. So his famous Campbell's soup cans were exhibited in some of his early shows, and they show us how he traced images from advertising with photo mechanical transfer, so silk screen. And silk screen printing most closely emulates the kind of slickness of advertising medium. And he repeats images of soup cans just infinitely and in different combinations, like the way they're lined up in a grocery store. Now, this isn't all the sole work of Warhol. He was not interested in the sacred touch of the artist's hand, but he worked collaboratively in the factory to create works like this. And in fact, in 1969, he said, "Everyone should be alike, be like machines. Then everyone will have 15 minutes of fame." This kind of, kind of mass anonymity, this was not something that Andy Warhol was scared of, but I think he saw this as the kind of inevitable turn in our society. And that notion of 15 minutes of fame, I mean, the first thing I think of is social media. The first, everyone's 15 minutes of fame on YouTube or Instagram or wherever else. I think Andy Warhol knew exactly where this kind of capitalist, extremist consumerism was leading us. Warhol always insisted that there was no deeper meaning to his work, but we really have to call that into question when we see his series of Marilyn Monroe and Jackie Kennedy. They were part of his larger series called the Disaster series. And I'm showing you a Marilyn diptych from those works. We see on the left, again, this repetitive silk-screened motif of Marilyn done in these day glows colors that were popular in mass advertising of the 50s and 60s. And then just the kind of black and white screen here on the right. This was done right after her suicide in 1962. And when seen within the title of the series, Disaster Series, I think there's a mediation here on death and destruction. Because we know all too well today that we become desensitized to death because we are constantly seeing images of it and references to it in social media and popular culture. And this begins here in the 60s. Marilyn Monroe was the J-Lo, Beyonce, Taylor Swift of her generation. She was a major sex symbol. She was considered the perfect image of female beauty. And after her death, it was only then when the public began to realize her troubles. Because what happens is that when we see images of a person, a celebrity, over and over again, we start to render her as a two-dimensional object and deny her a complex personality that was only revealed in Monroe's case after her death. So when Warhol says there's no meaning beyond the surface, beyond the superficial in his works, he's pointing out a grim reality that our society is one of surfaces. And if that's the case, then surface is where meaning must reside. Roy Lichtenstein, another pop artist, he liked to do large reproductions of action and romance comics. And here we see one of these classic figures from comics here, the kind of damsel in distress. Lichtenstein is giving us this image of passive femininity. Here, this woman drowning. I don't care. I'd rather sink than call Brad for help. Lichtenstein is drawing attention to the constructed nature of gender roles and the performative aspect of gender. He doesn't purely copy comics, but he isolates one frame, as we see here, and usually highlights the kind of tensest moment in the narrative. He also eliminates minor details in order to maintain the focus on the central emotion. And in his work, and actually I think this is too small here to see, but in Lichtenstein's work, he also actually paints the Ben Day dots, those little ink dots that we see present in the printed comics of this time. Well, you might have thought we were done with toilet art, but here's Claes Oldenburg's Soft Toilet from 1966, where he's taking Duchamp's artistic aims even further. And we see Oldenburg, again, taking a mundane object and representing it to us, really thinking again about how to push the definition of art and how to comment on everyday life. Minimalism has a very different look than pop art, but it was born out of the same historical context. I mean, this is a pretty far cry from something like a plush toilet sculpture or a print of a Campbell's soup can. But both the pop artists and the minimalists are part of that post-war, the baby boomer generation, who came of age questioning authority and thinking about the role of art in society. Keep in mind that the 60s were a time of important social justice movements. Women's rights, Chicano rights, the American Indian movement, or AIM, the anti-Vietnam movement, Black civil rights movement, the early environmental movement. The list goes on. Donald Judd's Untitled work is composed of these galvanized steel frames with plexiglass and colored lights. He is committed to geometric reduction in a similar way that we've seen in, for example, the work of the Russian avant-garde. Think about suprematism and constructivism. And like the pop artists, he also forces us to confront the notion of what art is and what our relationship is to art. He purposely doesn't title this work. It's not shown on a pedestal. It's kind of left barren with this extreme industrial aesthetic. In fact, Judd did not often complete his own sculptures, but he came up with the idea and then had a foundry or a workshop complete his works, again forcing us to reconsider the role of the artist. Think about how minimalism and pop art are similar. They both reject that kind of psychological, kind of navel gazing of abstract expressionism. They're not interested in the interior world of emotions and the psyche. And they reject individual expression as a whole. There's an interest in a kind of mass production, a consumerized, technologized society. And both pop art and minimalism dematerialize the artwork to an idea and introduce the idea of a collective approach to art making. In Robert Morris's minimalist sculpture, we have three identical L-beam shapes that are just it looks like they're almost kind of strewn on the gallery floor here. It brings the visitors out of their comfort zone. We have to interact with them, move around them. We're not even sure how to walk through them. Are we allowed to walk across this space? And the meaning is not, it's not straightforward here. And it also feels a little bit impersonal. The artist's hand did not touch the work. Again, demanding that we think about the definition of art. Where is meaning located? And I think for minimalist sculpture, meaning is located in this kind of active confronting of the work, purposefully putting us at unease. I just want to introduce two early works from Richard Serra, and we're going to return to more of works by Serra when we talk about the culture wars in a later part of this module. We're looking at Splashing and Strike in these two black and white photographs. In Splashing, Serra hurled molten lead at a studio wall to obliterate the distinction between the wall and the floor. It is site-specific. It cannot be done anywhere else and have the same exact meaning. This is also, I think, again, another connection to the Russian avant-garde, this idea of changing our relationship to space. Think about Vladimir Tatlin's counter relief that was displayed across a corner. And then in Strike, we see a huge piece of hot-rolled metal that is situated diagonally within a gallery space, disrupting the aesthetic principles of the gallery and interfering with our normal movement. But that name, Strike, it has strong political connotations. Again, think about the historical context of student strikes, student demonstrations, and social justice movements.